Olá a todos, boa tarde, sejam todos muito bem-vindos ao nosso último dia de encontro. Hoje a gente vai ter a apresentação do professor Marco Armiero, que é historiador ambiental e atualmente é diretor do Laboratório de Humanidades Ambientais do KTH na Suécia. E após essa palestra a gente vai ter a nossa mesa sobre o clima, que vai ser mediada pelo professor Sandro Dutra. Eu vou passar a palavra à coordenadora do Laboratório de História e Natureza, a professora Lise Cedrez, que é a mediadora da palestra de hoje.
Obrigada, Natasha. Eu devia ter penteado o cabelo. Boa noite a todos. Muito obrigada por estarem aqui conosco. Eu tenho hoje o prazer de apresentar um amigo muito querido. E essa apresentação é sempre um problema, porque eu acabo contando a minha idade e a dele. O Marco é um historiador ambiental com doutorado em História Econômica e atual diretor, como disse a Natasha, do Laboratório de Humanidades Ambientais no KTH em Estocolmo. Ele também mas ele tem muitos chapéus. Ele também é um pesquisador sênior do Consiglio Nazionale de Pesquisa da Itália. Ele foi um dos fundadores do campo de História Ambiental na Itália. E nós nos conhecemos quando éramos ambos estudantes de pós-graduação. O Marco tem trabalhado em muitas coisas, desde recursos naturais até a politização da natureza, paisagem, migrações, justiça ambiental. Ele é um grande pensador da discussão sobre esquerda e ambientalismo, e é um contribuinte costumaz, frequente, de revistas como Radical History Review, Capitalism, Nature and Socialism. Ele é também um dos editores sêniores dessa revista. E ele publicou comigo, uma generosidade enorme, porque o trabalho, ele que fez uma parte do trabalho, vamos assumir, um livro chamado Environmentalism, Local Struggles, Global Histories, and View from the South. Isso foi extremamente importante no que a gente chama de olhar o ambientalismo de forma global. Uma coisa que é começada com o John agora esqueci o nome dele. Mas, meu Deus, o cara, o ambientalismo dos pobres, que o nome agora me escapou. Mas, e o Ramachandra Gurra, que eu me lembro sempre, mas o Marco tem sido muito contínuo, muito ativo nessas discussões de justiça ambiental. Ele é um grande amigo da história ambiental da América Latina, trabalhando não só comigo, mas com vários historiadores ambientais, e recentemente ele foi um dos editores de um dossiê da ALAC, que é a Revista de História Ambiental da América Latina e do Caribe, junto com o Sandro e com o Zef Frank, se eu não estou enganada, e com a Eunice Nodari, logicamente. Não me lembro exatamente qual eram os três, mas o Marcos está em todas, está rigorosamente em todas. Então, é um barato, exatamente. A Hanna me lembrou o nome, Juan Martínez Allier, junto com Ramachandra Gurra, foram os que escreveram esse livro seminal sobre justiça ambiental global, que se chama Ambientalismo dos Pobres, ou Varieties of Environmentalism. Então, sem mais delongas, o Sandro está me dizendo agora, gente, a gente tem todo aqui um papo nos bastidores. O dossiê, desse dossiê que o Marco, a Eunice e o Zéfer trabalharam, ele está no ar hoje, então corram para pegar. Laboratório, vocês conseguem colocar, por favor, o link da LAC lá no chat do YouTube, para todo mundo poder correr, mas corram, por favor, só depois que o Marco apresentar, porque vai ser uma ótima apresentação. E, com isso, eu queria convidar o Marco a entrar aqui no YouTube e apresentar para a gente. A palestra vai ser em inglês, eu vou ajudar depois a traduzir as perguntas, mas o Marco é um grande comunicador, então é muito fácil segui-lo. Marco, it's your turn. I'm so proud, I'm so happy to see you here.
Well, obrigado, Lisa, and this is as much Portuguese you will get from me today. I am so sorry. I should learn Portuguese, but well, anyway, first of all, yes, it's a very special occasion for me because it's really amazing. It's a fantastic opportunity that precisely right now, ALAC is publishing this dossier that we have done on environmental justice in Latin America, and I must say that I am so grateful to Sandro, to the journal, to Eunice for inviting me. Of course, also it was a great pleasure to work with Zephyr on this. So many thanks. I want also to thank all the organizer of this event for having invited me. I feel very honored to be here with you today. And for me, the Brazilian network of environmental history laboratories is really a great model for the organization of our field. It's a very dynamic and creative way of organizing our field, and I deeply praise the way in which you overcome the usual binary opposition between teaching and researching. No, I must also add, and you might have understand this at this point. I must also add that I feel very privileged because I have so many friends there, very generous and dear friends in Brazil who give me opportunities like this one to be a better scholar, because meeting with you, presenting my work and discussing with you is the best way for me to be a better scholar. And indeed, this is, I hope that you can see my PowerPoint now. This is more or less the map of my talk today. Today, I will briefly present some of the arguments I have elaborated in my recently published book, Wasteocene: Stories from the Global Dump. The book was published by Cambridge University Press in the series Elements in Environmental Humanities, and the book has been translated, as you see, in Italian here in the slide, but soon will also be available in Portuguese. And let me thank my very dear friend Lisa Cedrets for her work on this, because it's completely her, I might say, her fault if the book would be in the end translated in Portuguese. So thank you so much, Lisa, for working on this. So today, what I'm going to say is I will say something about the Anthropocene, of course. I will then move to the Wasteocene, then say something about the epiphanies, the manifestations of the Wasteocene in history. And then finally, I will end saying something about the multifold practices which aim to sabotage the Wasteocene, to change the situation and doing something different. Okay, so let's start from the Anthropocene. Well, Wasteocene is part of the blooming of new terms and concepts born within and against the global narrative of the Anthropocene. As we know very well, I don't think I need to spend too much time on this. The Anthropocene is the age of humans, when humans have become agents in the transformation of the biogeochemical cycles of the planet. And in my volume, I started from the reinvention of the Anthropocene as a concept, and I reviewed basically the main critiques around against maybe the Anthropocene. Particularly, I focus on three points. First of all, the problematic we of the controversial we of the Anthropocene, the reification of the problem, so the obsession with the CO2 emission, and finally the limitation of the Anthropocene as a global narrative. So very quickly, the we in the Anthropocene is we the humans. The Anthropocene narrative says that it is that we the human, is that we the responsible for the present ecological crisis. Course of social sciences and humanities scholars have manifested their contrariety to this argument, because they believe that this argument is flattening social, racial, gender inequalities, even history itself, if we think about the ecological death theory, for instance. For this reason, other names for the new epoch have been proposed, including, and you can see here the spiral maybe, including the Plantationocene and the Capitalocene. The basic message here is to challenge the assumption that an indistinct we, the humans, is responsible of the ecological crisis. The second critique is this issue with the reification. Reification is coming from Latin, no, res, which means thing, the thing, right? So the reification of the problem refers to the focus in the Anthropocene discourse on the CO2 emissions. Reification of the problem means that we focus on the thing, so the CO2 emissions, and look for solutions to the thing, but we do not address the socio-ecological relationships producing the thing in the first place. And finally, I also want to say something about the Anthropocene as a global narrative. The Anthropocene speaks of the Earth system as a whole, but it may seem rather disembodied from specific places and subjects. Now, although I am, let's see if I can move, yes, although I am pretty critical of the Anthropocene in my volume, I try to avoid the usual handmade straw man. Referring to Jan Angus' work, I acknowledge that some, perhaps many, it's very hard to say, but at least some hard scientists do mention social inequalities and historical differences. I also make clear that those scholars using the Anthropocene label are not necessarily blind towards inequalities. For instance, in the volume, here in the slide, I mention Laura Pulido's essay, Racism in the Anthropocene. Indeed, Laura uses Anthropocene and not another label. So there's something powerful in using the Anthropocene as a label and as a concept. I believe that the Anthropocene has offered the opportunity for a rich debate. Without the Anthropocene, it would have been neither the Wasteocene nor the Capitalocene. And finally, let me say that I do not think that a word will change everything. But I think that it can change something if it opens up for the kind of discussion that we are having around the Anthropocene. In this sense, I believe that we can be both critical of, but also grateful to the Anthropocene discourse. Now, let me explain very briefly what I mean for Wasteocene. The Wasteocene is not the age of waste as a thing. It is not a fancy academic word to speak of the dirtiness of our cities. I define the Wasteocene as the age of wasting relationships, producing wasted people and ecosystems. It does not propose a universal we. Instead of indulging in a reification of the issue, waste in our case, Wasteocene focuses on relationships, not waste, but wasting relationships, not the passage between waste as a thing to wasting as relationship. And finally, the Wasteocene is indeed a global narrative, no discussion, but with a very strong taste. The Wasteocene is something one experiences in their lives, bodies, communities, and so on. In my volume, I propose commoning as the ultimate nemesis for the wasting relationship. Because as wasting relationships reproduce profit through othering and extraction, commoning is actually the act of building the commons. So not so much the commons as a thing again, but commons as social ecological relationships. So commoning is the social and ecological infrastructure allowing for the commons to exist. So I was saying, as wasting relationships reproduce profit through othering and extraction, commoning reproduces communities through caring and sharing. Now, the Wasteocene is not easy to be detected, to be seen. Sure, if we look around, we can see a lot of waste, right? But seeing the thing does not make the wasting relationships any more clearer. This is because wasting relationships produce two different kinds of toxicity. On one end, the deepening of capitalist toxic ecologies within the fabric of life, in the bodies and the environment, producing toxic ecologies at the service of private profits. So what Benjeri has called necro-capitalism, building upon Achille Bembe idea, concept of necropolitics. No? So this is one thing, the deepening of toxicity within the ecologies, producing profit in the capitalistic treadmill of production. On the other hand, the Wasteocene, the wasting relationships, they also produce and maintain toxic narratives. That is, narratives which silence injustice, impose an official truth, and erase any possibility of alternatives. This is why the Wasteocene stays invisible to us. In the third chapter of my book, I have argued that epidemics, but also other massive socio-ecological crises, have worked as epiphanies of the Wasteocene, meaning with this expression, the fact that they have functioned as manifestations of the wasting relationships that otherwise remain invisible to us. I have argued that those outbreaks have opened fractures in the wall of the Wasteocene, that is, the wall separating who are worthy from those who are considered disposable. Epidemics have always been a clear break into the Wasteocene. They shout loud and clear that bodies, power, and waste are connected through socio-ecological relationships. So now come with me, and more specifically to Naples in the Italian south, and listen to the stories of the Wasteocene epiphanies. Naples in southern Italy has always been an odd object, suspended between the global north and the global south. The city has always been the epitome of Italian contradictions. It is the city capital of the poor, or at least one of the poorest regions in the country, in Italy. And today I will focus briefly on three. Actually, no, I think I don't have time. Let's say that I will focus mainly on two epiphanies of the Wasteocene. So, two epidemics of cholera that happened in the 19th and in the 20th century. In 1984 and in 1973, Naples was hit by two cholera epidemics that I argue did not only confirm the dirtiness of the city, but also its deep otherness. Only a few years before the 1884 cholera epidemic, the Italian writer and artist Renato Fucini published his reportage from Naples, describing the city as a place radically diverse from civilized Europe. Fucini explicitly associated Naples to the Orient, arguing that the narrowness of the streets, the poverty of people, and the filth everywhere could easily deceive the travelers, convincing them to be in Alexandria in Egypt rather than in a European city. During the same years, the English writer and philanthropist Jessie White Mario was also traveling around Naples, and she was also denouncing the horrific conditions in which the poor were forced to live in Naples. Her book, with the unequivocal title La miseria di Napoli, which in English is like the misery of Naples, her book was full of sick bodies immersed within dirty environments. Visiting the abysmal shelters where the poor lived almost inevitably, White Mario, this philanthropist, placed at the center of the scene a sick child, someone affected by typhus lying on a straw bed, or an emaciated mother struggling to feed her newborns. In other words, what was happening in her book is that there was a very strong connection between wasted people and wasted places. Really, what is happening is that the wasted environment around those bodies is somehow entering in a relationship with the very body, the sick body at the center of this description. An American, a US historian, Frank Snowden, a Yale historian, has worked a lot on the cholera epidemics in Naples. And this is what he writes about the 1884 cholera epidemic. And I'm quoting from him. Cholera is an infallible indicator of destitution and squalor, of overcrowded dwellings and sanitary neglect, of defective sewers and unwashed ends. End quote. However, those environmental conditions were amplified by poverty, or using by our language, by the socio-ecological relationships which made some parts of the city and its inhabitants disposable. Poverty, waste, and contamination were the pillars of this Neapolitan political ecology of epidemics, indeed, the historical materialization of the Wasteocene. The epidemics, as any other spectacular emergency, offer a special view of the Wasteocene, because while the usual wasting relationships uh, basically are invisible and are invisibilized, normalized, those exceptional situations impose looking for solutions. But those solutions only aim to restore the Wasteocene norm rather than changing it completely. And here I am thinking about the present, the current time, when many people are talking about going back to normality, because we are in a pandemic time, while many activists around the world are repeating normality was the problem. And this is something that for us to think about. No, I think if really we need to go back to normality, or actually we want to change what was before. So in the 1884 cholera epidemic works as a handbook example of this discourse. As always with the Wasteocene, placing the blame on the victims is a crucial dispositive for controlling the emergency while keeping intact the underlying norms. The Neapolitan poor were part of the contaminated ecologies producing the epidemic. The dirtiness around them permeated both their bodies and souls, producing degraded communities, sick beyond the actual biological contagion. The problem was not to revert wasting relationships, but to control them, to be sure that the ordering order they were supposed to impose would not explode, blurring the borders between the designed social dumps and the rest of the city. As in a well-oiled script, the reaction to the 1884 cholera epidemic was the implementation of an urban policy designed to restore the borders between wasted and clean, pure and impure. Visiting the lower neighborhoods of the city, the Italian Prime Minister at that time, Agostino De Pretis, pronounced a phrase soon to become the motto of Neapolitan sanitization: Naples must be gutted. The metaphor of the bowels seemed especially effective in describing the sick body of Naples. In the Neapolitan Wasteocene, the bowels of people and those of the city were intertwined through a dirtiness that spilled over, transforming everything and everyone into a socio-ecological dump. More than a surgical metaphor or a medical prescription, gutting the bowels of Naples seemed to be a declaration of war. And such a war was not only, perhaps not even mainly, against the cholera vibrio, but the wasted district and especially the poor people living there. Those people and their dilapidated houses had to leave to make room for a modern boulevard building, modern boulevard buildings for the middle class and the upper class. And you can see in the slide, basically the white line was actually this boulevard that was built with the sanitization of the city. However, what happened? What happened was that with more than 35,000 destitute inhabitants expelled from the sanitized districts, the sanitization policy following the 1884 cholera epidemic meant deportation on a massive scale. While the cholera epidemic risked blowing up the ordering infrastructure, securing the immunization of the rich and the disposability of the poor, the consequent measures were meant to restructure the wasting relationships while hiding their acute consequences. Frank Snowden, again the historian from Yale I mentioned before, confirms the structural limits of the emergency intervention in the aftermath of the epidemics. Building upon a rich variety of sources, he has no doubt in arguing that, quoting from him, all the symptoms of urban pathology targeted by the Great Renewal Project were still present, including the marked disparities between the upper and lower cities. So the 1884 cholera epidemic unveiled the Wasteocene in the most dramatic way. Wasting relationships had produced wasted people and wasted places, dividing the urban space between the clean and healthy districts of the middle upper classes and the polluted and sick environments of the poor. However, the explosion of the epidemic questioned the foundational order of the Wasteocene, that is the Ordering Project, which was supposed to build a safe house against a contaminated and threatening them. Gutting the walls of Naples was a restoration of the Wasteocene rather than a radical change of it. Well, a confirmation of this lies in the fact that after the 1884 cholera epidemics, the city experienced other epidemics, some almost invisible in the typical Wasteocene style, others spectacularized or spectacular anyway. I was 7 years old when my parents took me to get the anti-cholera vaccination. At that time, there was no Facebook, so apparently people believed in vaccination rather than in maybe drinking some kind of weird medicine. But anyway, I was 7 years old. They took me to take a vaccination, and it was 1973, and Naples was exposed again to a cholera outbreak, proving the city's uncertainty in belonging to the modern and immunized world. The only memories I have of that period is the unbearable amount of lemons that my father forced us to eat. Apparently, this was a good prevention of the disease, but as I said, still, we got vaccinated, no discussion, and the almost compulsive fear of any kind of street food and seafood, which is still accompanying me even today after so many years. It is not clear how many people were killed by this late epidemic in Naples, perhaps only 20, not a lot. Almost 1,000 were hospitalized. The truth is that the cholera vibrio, the cholera that is the pathogenic agent responsible for the pandemic, was never found in the Neapolitan mussels. Nevertheless, the amount of contamination discovered in the clams was so high that the authorities decided to dismantle the nurseries in the sea around the city. Once again, the epidemic pulled off the invisibilization and normalization of Wasteocene relationships, revealing more systemic and persistent structures. Indeed, already in the 1970s, Naples registered higher percentages of stillbirth, child mortality, and infectious diseases than the national average. On Sunday, September 9, 1973, the radical left-wing newspaper Lotta Continua reported on the front page the death of the 18-month-old Francesca Noviello. For them, it was well clear, since the very title of the article, What Killed Francesca Was Not Only Cholera, this is the translation from Italia, so it was clear that the cholera was not the only culprit of her death. In fact, the Noviello family lived in a dilapidated building under completely unsanitary conditions, and to add injury to insult, the entire family, including Francesca, were left without any precautionary control, even after the father was hospitalized because he was infected by the cholera. Only after the death of Francesca, the newborn I just mentioned, The families inhabiting that building started rioting, and they were able to obtain to be relocated in a better building. And by the way, it was a public school. This was the better relocation for those families. I could not find any statistics about the precise geographical distribution of the 1973 cholera epidemic in the metropolitan area of Naples. One scientific paper published a year after the epidemic offered information about the social status of cholera patients. Out of 96 who were interviewed, a larger majority were either unemployed or had manual jobs. So we can confirm that cholera was actually hitting mostly the poor. And I will now shortly jump to the conclusion because I have only 4 minutes, more or less. So the epiphanies of the Wasteocene are crucial because they made visible the wasting relationships that otherwise are pretty much invisible to us. Because an important corollary of the wasting relationships is the production of toxic narratives, that is, of narratives that invisibilize and normalize injustice. If there is a cholera outbreak, it is because the poor are not attentive to the hygiene. If people are getting sick in a poor community, it is because they do not have the right lifestyles. In my book, I go deeper into this concept of toxic narratives, but I don't think we have time now. But what is a very important kind of pillar of the toxic narratives is this very famous line from the UK Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. She said that there is no such a thing as society. There are individual men and women, and there are families. But the UK Prime Minister was actually wrong. Communities exist, and in the most difficult moments, they mobilize. As wasting relationships, the engine of the Wasteocene, are based on consuming and ordering, commoning practices aim to reproduce resources and communities. And I argue that the contrary of wasting is commoning rather than recycling, because commoning dismantles the othering project, creates communities, and has the potential to undermine the Wasteocene regime. And in this final part of my talk, I want to present you maybe one example of this commoning project. During the COVID-19 pandemic, many have been the evidence that Thatcher was wrong, and commoning occurs, producing unexpected communities reacting to the terrible wasting of lives and livelihood. In several countries, people have started to self-organize, building an infrastructure of solidarity and support, especially targeting the most vulnerable families. In several countries, people's solidarity brigades have been created with the aim to offer concrete help to those who were struggling most in the pandemic. Sometimes in the bags packed with pasta and canned tomatoes, people have found books, a flyer on the Care Income campaign, or a questionnaire on their needs. One of the pillars of the Wasteocene regime is that each individual is responsible for herself, a message which became even stronger in time of crisis. Toxic narratives blamed individuals for being poor, subaltern, or sick. Common practices sabotage the Wasteocene logic because they reproduce social values through inclusion and community building, while wasting relationship reproduce inequalities through othering and wasting. I had another example in the book, which is an example from Tuzla in Bosnia Herzegovina, but maybe we don't have time to talk about this right now. If you wish, we can go back to this in the Q&A question. And so I am now just going to close. As the Wasteocene manifests itself through the imposition of toxic narratives and the erasure of the stories of resistance, so the struggle against it passes also through the construction of alternative archives, as those created by the Workers' University in Tuzla in Bosnia-Herzegovina, the case that I didn't present to you. Those stories tell loud and clear that to dismantle the Wasteocene, it is not enough to clean up a toxic area. To fight back against the Wasteocene logic, the activists have to uncover the stories of the workers intoxicated by the capitalistic organization of labor and the struggles occurring within and outside the factory. They need to build new relationships among them and with the environment, as it occurred in the city with the Solidarity Brigades and in Tuzla with the Plenums and the Workers' University. Sometimes, indeed, people can dance around a toxic fire, in the sense that they might find the reasons and the strengths to imagine and practice new communities building upon their experience of being wasted, placed on the other side of the Wasteocene divide. Damir Arsenjevich, the person, the scholar who has worked mostly on the Tuzla case, Damir Arsenjevich writes that one of the participants to the public assemblies in Tuzla said that for him, that experience was like being on a holiday, meaning with it the happiness and the breaking of the normal he felt through that experience. In many places around the world, among the ruins of the thousand apocalypses subaltern people have been living in for ages, people are telling another story, one of solidarity, commoning, and resistance. The Wasteocene aims to waste those stories, erase them, domesticate memories. Then I think that this is a big challenge for us, for historians. Can we think of recovering these wasted stories? Can we do something with this wasting of memories and stories that the Wasteocene logic is actually producing? I believe that the revolutionary project needs to take control of the means of production of narratives, at least also of narratives. Thank you very much, and sorry for being a little bit longer than I was supposed to.
Marco, it was great. Thank you so much. We have a couple of questions. I'd like to begin with the question by Mariana Ribeiro. Marco, could you speak a bit more about the conception of the book? How was the process of writing the book, Wasteocene, and how you have come to generate, to create the idea of Wasteocene? Thank you. It's a very good question, Mariana.
Marianne, it's a good question. Then I should ask you, I don't know if you like science fiction movies like me, because at this point I should do like Morpheus in Matrix and ask you, do you want the red or the blue pill? Because I can tell you the right answer and I can tell you the truth. So let's start with the right answer. The right answer is that I have been working on waste for many years. I started in 2009, 8, because in Naples there was a huge waste crisis for more or less 20 years. And so I decided to be involved somehow in this environmental justice struggle. And what was happening basically was, for me, was trying to connect a very local specific story to a broader story and pattern. And this is what was the Wasteocene all about, in a sense. So trying to understand, to go beyond, as I said, the reification, but thinking about the social relationships producing the problem, because this was what was happening actually on the ground. The people on the ground, sorry, the grassroots activists, sometimes, I know that seems a little bit strange, but sometimes they failed. Many times they failed. They were not able to stop, a landfill, a dump, or whatever. But what they did was to create a new identity. So what was happening, that the dump was there, but in another place in the same neighborhood, maybe they started a cycle, how do you say, cycle of movies, which they were screening the movie in the public square. You may say, well, I don't see any relationship between this. I think that I saw the relationship. The relationship is to say no to be a wasted community, to be a dump. The idea is not to identify yourself with the wasting project that wants you to believe that you are actually waste. Now, this is the right answer. The truth is that I applied for a huge grant. I was asking for a lot of money to study the Wasteocene on a global scale, and I was rejected. I was rejected actually pretty badly, to tell you the truth. It was a bad rejection, not very nice. And I don't know if happened to some of you, but sometimes I feel a little bit, I don't know, like, I feel the need to say, you know what, actually I think my idea was not so bad. And so I decided to say, you are not giving me the money, but still I want to speak about this Wistocene. So the book was also a little bit an answer to this failure. And well, it was also, I mean, I wrote the book basically during my recovery because I got sick. I got very sick in March 2020. I got COVID-19, but not, a little bit. I was in the hospital. I was for a month in the hospital. I was intubated. My chance to survive were pretty small, 50% to be specific. So I came back home pretty happy to be still alive. Hopefully I am still alive. Sometimes I ask myself if I am still in coma or not in a coma, but I think I am still alive. And so I had a lot of time, and it was a perfect moment for me to reflect about the wasting of lives. It was also a very personal journey, if I can say this.
Sorry. I had some problems here with my internet, which is part of this internet world. Thank you, Marco. And I remember very well when you were in Intubate, and I can't say how much it was. I was furious with Sweden and their policy regarding the COVID, because it was amazing. It was absolutely flabbergasting the way they did compared to the other countries. But then little could imagine that my own president, I mean, I could imagine, but let's not go there.
But we should also say that the Swedish hospital was pretty good. I am pretty happy that they were able to save me.
At least. Anyway, the other question is from, it's mine. I was very interested in the way we had this discussion before, by the way, in the way you were talking about this wasting relations and how it was systematic, and therefore you do reject this attempt for personal, individual responsibilities for the wasting relations that we have, the entitling of footprint, ecological footprint, and so on. On the other hand, you support and encourage those communal initiatives, by small groups, by communities. It's something I'd like you to work a bit more on that, because sometimes I feel, and we did have this discussion before, that when we blame the entire environmental crisis is the system, it gives me a feeling of impotence. That's huge. So there's nothing to do until let's wait for the revolution, and then we have it. And I have been waiting for the revolution for a long time, Marco.
It's not happening.
Yeah, well, or it is, because maybe you point out about these local initiatives and the way that the local initiatives can do, not with a script, but it's not one individual, but it's a community, and that may change some things. And I would love you to expand a bit more in this discussion about how we can challenge the system, not by checking our personal footprint, but by engaging.
Thank you, Lisa. Well, first of all, I mean, I would like to be personal because it's the way in which I want to be a scholar. I don't want to hide myself, beyond some kind of title or, scholarship. So first of all, let's to be very open and truthful with all of you. I think that this is actually one of my problems. I think maybe it's a little bit a problem with my, if I can say in this way, my, political part. For a long time, we have been very insensitive. I think that we couldn't really understand very well the relationship between individual choices and general issues. In a sense, we couldn't really cope with the fact that the revolution has to pass through the mind, the soul, the life of everyone. I think that in the book, I try to actually overcome this. I mean, I don't think that the problem, I mean, in a sense, of course, wasting relationships are coming, are structural, as you said. It's capitalism producing wasting relationship, but it's true that we have a lot of leverage and possibility to sabotage this, to be there, to be within this wasting relationship in different and even antagonist, counter-hegemonic ways. So I believe that I am, at least I am trying to learn something. I'm trying to learn how we should also embody the revolution that we are, how can I say, preaching or whatever, thinking, reflecting upon. But this is, if you think, then it's not even so strange. I mean, we can mention Angela Davis here, the very famous, feminist African American activist, philosopher, political thinker, and she once, I think that she used to say that we need to decolonize our mind. So there is a work that must be done by each of us. I mean, if you think about the patriarchal, culture. I mean, it's not that the revolution will save us. It's something that each of us needs to deal with, starting from our personal lives. So I mean, I truly believe that, I mean, for me, I call this performative politics. Instead of waiting for, something that will happen in the future, I want the world I am wishing for now, and I want this word in my life, in the way in which I talk to people, even in the way in which I do this terrible job, right? Trying to be truthful to you, trying to be different in the way in which I am. So in a sense, I am struggling. I don't want to say that I solved my contradiction, because I think it would be untruthful. I think that many times I am still struggling with this. For instance, when in Sweden people are challenging me because I fly too much. Not
Mhm.
that I really fly like Superman, but I take too many planes. I am a little bit uncomfortable, because then I ask myself, well, my university has, all kind of, of problems in terms of CO2 emissions, but then the problem is me going to Brazil for a conference. So maybe there is more that I need to reflect. There is more that I need to understand. I don't want to solve this saying, Lisa, I have solved your problem. I think that you are pointing out to a big, how can I say, hole, big weakness in my, in the way in which I frame transformation. And I am struggling, try to change it. And I believe that the way in which I am trying to do that is thinking that if you want the revolution, you must first of all interrogate yourself how much you are embedded into a racist, patriarchal, capitalist, extractivist, competitive neoliberal system in your mind, in your soul, in your relationships.
Thank you so much, Marco. You know that we are going to keep discussing this, because that's what we do. We discuss the way
Yeah.
we go, and because it's important. Now, there's a question by Hannah and Mariana, which is it's a bit on the side, but I think it's quite interesting in this discussion that you are having regarding those local action, communal, communing relationships, as opposed to the wasting relationships. What do you think about the Kurds in Rojava? They resist to the Turkish control and both to the Turkish state, but also to the ISIS. They also are based on the idea of democratic confederalism and gender equality. So does it fit in this discussion that we were making before?
Zapatistas, Kurds, they are the people that we should look at. What is interesting about the Kurds is something, again, a little bit weird, if you wish. But what happened in Naples the people, the activists fighting for environmental justice, fighting around this issue of waste and toxic contamination, at a certain point, they discovered the revolution in Rojava. And actually, some of them went to Rojava, and the public, how do you say, the municipal government of Naples decided to give the honorary citizenship to Ocalan. So Ocalan is now a honorary citizen of Naples. And again, you can say, well, it's a bit weird. How do you make this connection between environmental justice in Naples, southern Italy, Rojava, and so? I think that the connection is precisely because those people are not talking about a thing. They are not looking for a techno fix. So, a solution to an ecological problem. They are looking for new socio-ecological relationships. And this is what also the people in Rojava are trying to do. I mean, the situation in Rojava is so bad that I believe it's very hard actually to implement their model, which is a very interesting model. They have been inspired by, I think, Bachkin, right? Anarchism and so on and so forth. So the PKK they started with the very, communist roots, and they are moving towards something completely different. Ocalan has written something very interesting about, for instance, the need to defeat patriarchy inside your mind, in yourself. Speaking of, if the revolution is something independent from the individual, it's not. Otherwise we end up in Siberia, and it's not fun. We want a different kind of revolution. And yes, I see there's a beautiful poster, maybe as a murales, I don't remember, with two women, a Kurd woman and a Zapatista woman, ending ends in ends, and the same lot, the same fight, something like that. So I mean, I think there is something that we can learn. Uh, but I am not working so much on this, so I am not a big expert on the Rojava revolution. I know a few things from what I have read.
Thank you so much, Marco. Natasha, do we have more questions? Marina Salgado. First, she's thanking you for the excellent talk. And then, what do you think about the role of the environmental historian regarding the problems that you associated to the Wasteocene or Capitalocene?
Thank you, Marina. Obrigado. Well, first of all, I believe that we have already done something, because, precisely this multiplication, this blooming of new concept is coming a lot from, scholars in the humanities and social sciences. It's not just the Capitalocene, it's of course the Plantationocene, is the uh, the Wasteocene, is the Econocene, Technocene, and so on and so forth. Maybe too many to tell you the truth, but I believe that we have been working in the right direction. I believe that one thing that it's really important is to think about this memory dump. The idea, because the problem, I think that the problem with the Wasteocene logic is that it's not enough to transform a community in a socio-ecological dump. The Wasteocene logic needs to kill, to erase the very possibility that something else was happening. So erasing the stories of, resistance, of commons, of whatever. And I think that this is a place in which historians can be relevant, important there. And don't take me wrong, I don't want here, I am not romanticizing anything. I think that everywhere there are problems, and I can start talking about the problems in all the cases I have mentioned in my book, the commoning experience in Tuzla, or the solidarity brigades, and so on and so on. It's not, we are not the priests of some kind of cult, but the very fact that we want to listen to those stories, that we acknowledge the fact that those stories have been erased, I think it's crucial. And then bringing these stories to the surface, I believe that there is the possibility to be self-reflexive, to see the limitation, to explore all the contradictions of this. And I think that maybe this is an important role for us as environmental historians to, uh, first of all, to recover the dumped memories from the memory dump, and second, to fight against invisibilization, but also normalization. You know, the fact that something is normal, we must fight against it. If you think about the sanitization process, I believe that in the past, sometimes urban environmental historians, maybe we have been focusing too much on the technical infrastructures, right? So we have been studying, sewer system, the water pipes, and I don't know, whatever, the waste metabolism and so on and so on. But maybe if we bring in this discussion power relationships, if we bring the memories of people, if we start looking at the organosphere, and I define the organosphere as the sphere of the living. So it's not the geosphere, it's the organosphere. If you look at the organosphere, you will discover, the maybe the how do you say, like the Silicocene, the age of silicosis for the miners. You might discover the Asbestocene, the age of the asbestos in the bodies of workers. So the body as a repository, as an archive of stories of oppression, but also of stories of liberation. Because I believe that the politicization of the body is part of the subjectification of new political subjects. Instead of becoming a political subject because somebody is telling you about some philosopher or some theories, you are becoming a political subject because you meet other mothers in the hospital where your kid is dealing with a terrible sickness, and you transform a terrible, dramatic, daunting uh, private experience in the collective experience of oppression and of a struggle for liberation.
That's absolutely great. There's the Marina had a continuation, but I think that you have already answered that. It's the dilemma about how to write a historical environmental narrative, an environmental narrative that is historic and that it's critic to all these questions without being charged as, oh, you're too ideological, you're an activist, or so on. You have lived with this your entire life, Marco.
Marina, I don't know. I should think a little bit better before saying anything because I can say something stupid. I mean, generally I say something stupid, but at least I don't realize it. So let's think a bit more because I mean, to tell you the truth, what I was going to answer to you a little bit, just out of my mind is no way they will tell you. But maybe it's a bit depressing. So I am trying to see if I can come up with a better answer. But anyway, I again what I believe that the issue, let's try to be serious. I believe that the issue about bias, it's a wrong issue. What we need is good scholarship. So let's discuss about good scholarship. Medical doctors, at certain point in history, medical doctors were thinking that actually asbestosis, so the cancer to the lungs caused by asbestos, was just a fantasy. They were sitting with the big companies, with the corporations, with the, I would say, with the capitalists, and they said, we are not ideological. There is no such a thing as this sickness. Then, at a certain point, some researchers decided to listen to the workers. They decided to actually take side, to be activists, you might wish. What happened was that they produced better scientific knowledge because in the end they were right, and there was a disease caused by asbestos to the lungs of the workers. So I think that we need to free ourselves from the idea that, you know, to be biased means to be bad scholars. To be biased means, as Sandra Harding, the very famous feminist philosopher of science, said, I mean, if you are taking side, actually you are producing a strong objectivity, an objectivity that is stronger than the non-biased one. First of all, because generally speaking, the people who say I'm not biased, they just either hide their bias or they do not realize their bias. And, you know, both cases are pretty bad. And second, being, you know, take a side does not mean to falsify your sources to be a bad scholar. If a community is asking me, Marco, can you help us to prove that, you know, in 1973 the factory started to dispose toxic waste in the river, and I cannot find the materials for that. I am not falsifying and saying, yeah, sure, I found this video that I made at home with my friends. I am not falsifying, but what I will do, if I don't find the sources, I will look harder. And this is maybe the difference. When I was working on forests in Italy in the 19th century, completely absurd, but anyway, when I was working on forests in Italy in the 19th century, all my sources, archival sources, they were repeating one single truth. We need to privatize the forest if we want to save the forest. Those peasants, they are destroying the forests. So this was the truth. What I did was not to falsify my sources. What I did was, you know what, I don't believe you. I don't believe this archive. I want to disobey the archive, to be undisciplined towards the archive. So what I did was trying to look for sources which could support my hypothesis, and I was able to find them. I think I was producing a better science precisely because I was biased. My supervisor, I hope he's not listening to me now, he told me, Marco, please don't do that. You have the sources, you have enough material. This is the story. The story is that the peasants were destroying the forests. So it's not enough, you know, to find the sources. If you are biased, you look better.
Thank you so much, Marco. Now we do have to end here, as far as I understand, because Hannah had to go to support other things. Another comment. I just wonder. Let me check if there are more questions here, and I'm trying to do it in a way that I know how to do, and I don't make sure. I'm not sure I do. Marco, just have some patience here.
Sure.
Patience here.
Thank you so much for helping me.
Okay. Now, there are some discussions here. Nicholas Covey, a good friend, is thanking you for the talk. Maria always just saying that you're totally right. Just the fact that you're not approaching some questions already an ideological position. Therefore, it's agreement. And Marina Salgado has just thanked you about this. It's a very good answer. And I think that if there are no longer questions, we took already so much of your time, and you were planning to be here 1 hour ago. That there was a mishap with it.
My confusion.
No. So I would like to thank everybody for being here, and I'd like to thank Marco for being here. So we are. It's going to be recorded in this particular in our channel at YouTube. And I'd say thank you and goodbye to everybody. Bye, Marco. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to be with you, and thank you for this fantastic discussion and for making, as I said, to force me to be a better scholar. Thanks.
You do. So we are just waiting for you to come back to Brazil in person, so we can take you again to the Babylonia Hill. Okay?
I am.
Natasha.
Agradecer mais uma vez a oportunidade de ouvir o professor Marco, agradecer quem tem aceito esse convite, agradecer a Lise por ter mediado essa palestra. E eu queria lembrar a todo mundo que está assistindo, a gente vai encerrar essa palestra agora, e a gente vai dar continuidade ao evento. A gente tem a mesa do clima, que vai ser mediada pelo professor Sandro Dutra. Então, a gente vai encerrar essa transmissão e uma nova vai ser aberta no canal, tá? Então, a gente encerra essa e continua daqui a pouquinho, alguns minutos, a mesa sobre o clima. Muito obrigada, gente. Foi um prazer ter vocês aqui.
Obrigado, Io.
Tchau, tchau.
Ciao.